Fantasy Freaks and Geeks. What's going on? James Coe here with you. I hope everyone had a great Christmas. I think I had alluded to earlier this week that I wasn't going to do any more podcasts for the week to gear up for the holidays and all that kind of stuff. Listen. It's championship week. Yeah, I got to do what I got to do. And that is pump out a bunch of sleepers, man. So again, this is obviously getting right down to it. As a matter of fact, when some of you guys listen to me here, some of these games will be going on. So let's get right into it. I'm going to just lay them all out there and go as quickly as possible here. 15 minutes. Let's get you through every single position. I got 14 different sleepers here for every single league depth. All right, we're going to start the quarterback position. Mason Rudolph taking on Jacksonville. I'm not breaking any ground here. Jacksonville, they stink. All right. The Jags have given up the most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. An insane 8 of the last 13 quarterbacks that the Jaguars have faced have scored 24 or more fantasy points. Mason Rudolph is in a great position. He's got a couple of pass catchers here that will be featured on this list as well. Bryce Young taking on Tampa Bay. The Buccaneers have allowed the second most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Young has obviously been playing much better in recent weeks. Plus, from an injury angle, Bucs All-Pro Antoine Winfield, he's been ruled out yet again. Meanwhile, on the other side, Xavier Legette is coming back from an injury for Carolina. At least we think so. He's been dealing with some hip and wrist injuries here, but he's been a limited participant in practice all week long. There seems to be optimism that Legette will get back in there for Carolina. By the way, Bryce Young, coming off of his first 3 touchdown performance of the season, 2 passing, 1 rushing from last week. Bryce Young, a very interesting start against Tampa Bay this week. Maybe you've got Jalen Hurts and you need one of these guys to come through for you. Well, shoot, if you've got Jalen Hurts, then you're definitely thinking about Kenny Pickett as well. He's taking on Dallas, and obviously Jalen Hurts ruled out with that concussion. Look, I don't think Pickett looked amazing, but at the same time, I don't think he looked that bad. This guy came in super cold, had no practice time with the ones. That's different this week. Right, his ribs do concern me a little bit here, but man, the matchup I think is really, really good. Dallas allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Trayvon Diggs, obviously, in IR. There's just a lot of different things working here. I don't think Dallas's defense is very good, especially in their passing game. So Kenny Pickett throwing to A.J. Brown, throwing to Devontae Smith. I think he's actually a fine streamer this week if you want to go that route. Shoot, if you want to play DFS, I'm imagining Kenny Pickett is pretty darn inexpensive. You could stack him up with A.J. Brown and get it going. All right, let's talk about the running back position here. Amir Abdullah taking on New Orleans. The Saints have been consistently terrible against the run. 4.86 yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs. That ranks as the 3rd worst in the NFL. They are also 3rd worst in terms of run stuff rate. Amir Abdullah is obviously going to work in there with Alexander Mattison, but Mattison continues to be absolutely awful on the ground. He is almost assuredly a touchdown-dependent running back option for him. Meanwhile, Amir Abdullah has actually given you extremely consistent production out of the backfield as a pass catcher in PPR formats. Man, I mean, you talk about the significant work that he has been getting. I mean, 6 receptions and 52.5 receiving yards per game over his last two contests. Again, 6 receptions, 52.5 receiving yards. That's out the gates. We're talking 11.25, right? Or what is it? My math is not mathing right now. 11.25. Yeah, I think that's right. 11.25 PPR points in those last 2 games, just based off of the receiving work. So again, if you're looking for that, running back replacement right now, you're looking for a little bit of a sleeper. Again, you're playing DFS. Amir Abdullah taking on New Orleans. I don't hate it. Tyjae Spears taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Tony Pollard questionable, but man, he did not practice all week long due to that sore ankle. I mean, at worst, it's basically what we're going to see from last week, which is kind of sort of a 50-50 split. A 50-50 split against Jacksonville is not bad, okay? The Jaguars have obviously been absolutely terrible defensively. I talked about those passing numbers. Well, shoot, man, they've given up the second most fantasy points per game to the running back position as well. And obviously, Spears, my God, has come alive, man. Almost over the last 2 weeks, he has scored 2 touchdowns apiece in those 2 games. That's crazy. 4 touchdowns over his last 2 weeks. Guess what? He has had 4 total touchdowns in his entire career. He's doubled that in 2 weeks. That's not bad. That is not bad. He's going to continue to see a lot of work here with Tony Pollard, obviously extremely banged up with that ankle injury. Look, the groundwork has still been extremely ugly. 2.29 yards per carry over his last 2 weeks. But much like the aforementioned Amir Abdullah, man, he has seen a huge bump in receiving work, averaging 5.5 targets, 4.5 receptions, and 63 receiving yards per game over his last 2 games. By the way, this matches up perfectly with what Jacksonville struggles with as well. They have given up the 3rd most receptions and the 2nd most receiving yards to running backs this year. All right, how about Tyrone Tracy taking on the Indianapolis Colts? The Colts have given up the 5th most fantasy points per game to the position. They rank 3rd to last in explosive run rate allowed. I mean, that is pretty darn promising considering the explosive nature of Tracy's run style. By the way, I mean, shoot me, this one might not even be considered a sleeper by some of y'all, and that's okay, man. That is okay. But if you were wondering whether you should start Tracy, the answer is yes, you should start Tracy. He scored 14-plus points, PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games. And with Drew Lock under center, I do think that Brian Daboll will lean on Tyrone Tracy in the backfield quite a bit. All right, we transition to wide receivers now. Let's talk about Jayden Reed taking on Minnesota. And again, I know there's going to be some of y'all saying, wait, hold up now, man. Jayden Reed, he's not no sleeper. What do you mean? We're talking about top 25 wide receiver here. You can't be a sleeper. Well, listen, there's a lot of folks out there wondering whether or not they should even play Jayden Reed. So is he a sleeper? I don't know, but I'll say this. Since week number 7, Jayden Reed is the wide receiver 44. Ouch. Okay, he has fewer points than Quentin Johnston. Guys, Quentin Johnston, since week 7, missed 2 games with an injury, and like Reed, also put up a fat 0 spot in that time span. Okay, it's not as if Quentin Johnston has been a world beater here. Far from it. 2 games missed with injury and a fat 0 since week number 7. Okay? That is who Jayden Reed has scored less fantasy points than. My God. Meanwhile, the matchup's great against Minnesota. The Vikings give up a ton of production through the air, but specifically versus the slot, they've given up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to receivers who line up inside. JSN, Keenan Allen, they scored 24 and 20 PPR points respectively in back-to-back weeks against Minnesota. I'm not saying Jayden Reed sees that kind of volume, the kind of volume that JSN and Keenan Allen see, certainly. Oh, heaven forbid. Heaven forbid Green Bay's best wide receiver sees that kind of volume. Heaven forbid. But he just doesn't. I mean, shoot, he can't even get on the football field because LaFleur is obsessed with taking him off of 2 wide receiver sets. It's absolutely insane. Anyways, regardless, neither here nor there. That's a rant for a different time. Jayden Reed is in a good spot. I do think he's got, 15 to 20 point upside if we're talking about a potential shootout here. Oh, by the way, Green Bay taking on Minnesota. By the way, we talked about Minnesota. Okay, well, listen, Romeo Doubs, also a sleeper in this matchup. The Vikings, while they've given up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to the slot, they are dead last in fantasy points allowed to outside wide receivers. Romeo Doubs is in a pretty good spot. All right, if you need a deeper sleeper, how about Brandin Cooks taking on Philadelphia? This matchup, it's horrid. I get it. Quinyon Mitchell, the Eagles, they have been tough versus outside receivers. But man, you cannot ignore the volume upside when we're talking about Brandin Cooks. With CeeDee Lamb out now, Cooks could potentially see 8 to 10 targets this week. And again, when you're looking at sleepers, I know the matchup is no good. I know it's Cooper Rush, but dang, man, how do you walk away? I mean, again, this is a deeper sleeper. But if you're in a 14-team league, how do you look at Brandin Cooks and say, all right, this is at least interesting here? A guy that could potentially see 8 to 10 targets in this matchup against Philadelphia. All right, if you want another deep sleeper, how about Olamide Zaccheaus taking on Atlanta? I know this feels like we're chasing the points because Olamide scored 2 touchdowns last week. I'm calling him Olamide Zaccheaus. Sounds like the Greek god of useless fantasy points. That's just what it sounds like. Got to make our tribute. To Olamide Zaccheaus this harvest time. You know what I'm saying? That's what it sounds like. Zaccheaus sounds like a Greek god, man, for sure. But he's taking on Atlanta. And let me just say this, man. Atlanta, they're tied for the most touchdowns allowed to the wide receiver position. That's pretty good for a wide receiver who, again, is coming off a 2-touchdown performance. Oh, by the way, the reason we're listing Olamide Zaccheaus is because of injury. Noah Brown obviously has been on IR, and De'Ami Brown, who should have been the number 2, or basically was kind of the de facto number 2 wide receiver there for Washington, he's also out. He's got a hamstring injury. So there should be plenty of snaps and plenty of targets available for the Greek god of random fantasy points. Xavier Legette, we talked about, he's taking on Tampa Bay. Got to keep an eye on whether or not he's actually going to be active. It sounds like he will be. He's in a great spot. Tampa Bay has allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers. But again, just keep an eye on that injury report. All right, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine taking on Jacksonville. This is such an interesting one to me, man. I really like NWI this week against the Jags because the Jags, look, they've given up a ton of production to outside wide receivers, but they're especially bad at defending deep passes. They rank dead last in both receptions and receiving yards allowed on deep passes this year. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine has been a guy who has thrived on big plays and specifically touchdowns. Well, shoot, man, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, NWI, in a very interesting spot here against Jacksonville. So again, this is a player where 12-man league, you'd have to be decimated by injuries going into championship week. If you're looking on the DFS side, again, somebody who I'm interested in. If you're looking to make a sports bet, anytime touchdown, NWI taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. All right, finally, a very deep sleeper for you. I mean, again, you have to be in dire straits for this one, okay? But Al Lazard taking on Buffalo. You figure the Jets are going to be trailing mightily in this ball game. They're a 9.5-point underdog. So that's got to encourage more passing volume. Has to. And since returning from injury, Lazard has been out there a ton, man. He's played over 75% of the offensive snaps in the games since he has returned. Now, that hasn't necessarily turned into a lot of production, but still, he's out there. He's getting opportunities. The Bills, meanwhile, have allowed the 2nd most receiving yards to inside receivers this year. The 78.2% completion rate allowed to inside wide receivers, that ranks dead last in the NFL. If Aaron Rodgers is going to be looking for some easy checkdowns, Al Lazard will be available. He will be available if Aaron Rodgers looks his way. Don't be surprised by a 7-target, 5-catch, 45-yard day. And again, interesting upside for touchdowns as well. All right, last one here for you, and it comes at the tight end position. And I know people are thirsty in the fantasy streets for a fantasy tight end. Bro, can I throw out Max Payne Durham taking on Carolina? There's a good 40% of you, 50% of you who are like, where does this man play? Where does Max Payne Durham play? He plays in Atlanta. This is why you come to the Sleeper King. Okay, we do the digging here for you, baby. Cade Otton has been ruled out. And in a similar spot last week where Cade Otton was also out, okay, Durham was a dominant starter. He played an absurd 93% of the snaps last week. He ran the second most routes last week. He turned that into 7 targets, which is, for a tight end, extremely good. 5 receptions and 29 yards. People aren't paying attention because the production didn't necessarily match up. But man, when you look at the usage, sign me up for Max Payne Durham. You just can't ignore that kind of usage, man. You just can't do it. And again, he's another player. DFS. I love this guy. Are you kidding? Extremely valuable in DFS. Did I mention the matchup is rock solid as well, man? The Panthers are dead last in touchdowns allowed to tight ends. Tight ends, touchdowns. Obviously, as we know, touchdowns are the lifeblood to a fantasy tight end. And Max Payne Durham seeing tons of volume, tons of usage. 7 targets last week. Can he flip one of those into a touchdown? Very possible against the Panthers unit that's giving up a lot of touchdowns to that position group. So there you go. Max Payne Durham for the win. All right, I got to get out of here, guys. I hope you guys enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the games on both Saturday and Sunday. Go win some chips, baby. Go win some chips. If I helped you, you're welcome. If I didn't help you, I apologize, man. But good luck to everyone out there. Go find me on social media. Just real quick, the schedule moving forward, we're going to be reducing these bad boys, obviously. Probably going to like once, maybe twice a week, just kind of sort of how my fancy goes here. And we'll get it going from there, man. I got a lot of things I'm working on. I got some things in the pipeline here that Sleeper King football is going to be working on, man. So interesting stuff on the horizon here for the website and the company, and I can't wait to share it with you when that time comes. All right, but until then, remember, it's never too late to chase your dreams. Peace.